Okay, I'm the executive director of the 14th Street Y. As many of you know, 14Y is downtown's Jewish community center, as well as the lead convener of the Downtown Jewish Life Network, which organizes programs that explore Jewish life, culture, community, and Israel. It's my privilege to welcome you to tonight's program, 77 Minutes of Hope. This is our second year doing a Yom Ha'atzmaut program like this, and we have an incredible lineup for tonight. This is an evening of storytelling, art, resilience, and strength to mark Israel's Independence Day. I want to begin tonight by acknowledging the terrible wildfires happening around Jerusalem. We know that some of you have family there and hope that your loved ones and everyone living there are safe and unharmed. I also want to mention one small change about tonight's program. Unfortunately, Iddo Gefen is not able to join us tonight, and so we have Sarah Rosen, who he has asked to read his talk instead. We're delighted Sarah's with us and are glad to share Iddo's words with you. Tonight, we focus on hope. What does it mean to hope during difficult times? Where do we find hope today? Jewish tradition teaches us to find hope and strength in the act of coming together, in community.
I remind myself of this saying, and I also remind myself of the source of strength and resilience that we have. This is not the first dark time, it's not the second, it's not the millionth dark time that our people went through. We've been there. Worst, better, variations on the theme. We have been there. Our ancestors did not despair. The sharp swords were laid on their necks. They did not despair. Maybe some did, maybe all of us for a short time. But as a collective, we did not succumb to despair. And I think that we could adopt this theme maybe for the future. Thank you.
I'll be reading this piece by Iddo Gefen on his behalf. Shalom and good evening. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to join you at this wonderful event as I had to travel to Israel unexpectedly for the shiva of a close family member. Now I know what you're all probably thinking. Yes, this is exactly the kind of uplifting and inspiring story I hoped for when I bought tickets to an event about hope. After all, what better way to lift the human spirit than someone not showing up because of such a reason? But before I tell you why I insist on writing about hope, even in this moment, I want to share something that happened to me while I was out buying a few things for the shiva. A few days ago, while I was walking down the street in the center of Tel Aviv, around 9:59 a.m., a black car stopped right in front of me, and the cab behind it started honking furiously. As sometimes happens in Israel, middle fingers were quickly waved in the air and the finest curses in the Hebrew language flew all around. Both cars came to a halt. The drivers got out, seething with rage. And then, the tzvira, the Holocaust Remembrance Day siren, began. An elderly woman sitting in the cab opened her door. The man that drove in the black car motioned to the cab driver, and without hesitation, both immediately stopped fighting and rushed to help her. They stood by her side, silently supporting her as the siren echoed around them. When it ended, the two gently helped her back into the cab and closed the door behind her. Sorry, Achi, my brother, it's been a terrible year, the man said to the cab driver, who placed a hand on his shoulder. I know, the driver replied. Believe me, I know. In the past few days, I've been wondering which of these scenes is more Israeli. Israelis who feel comfortable stopping all traffic to fight in the middle of the road with someone they don't even know. Israelis who leave this fight in a single moment to help a person in need. Or Israelis that don't know one another, standing next to each other, reading in silence, each other in silence to honor the memory of the Holocaust and all those who perished. Until it hit me. It's this rare and strange combination of all these things together in that exact moment that I'm not sure could happen anywhere else in the world. Like the man in the black car, it's been a terrible year for me too, and I'm sure many of you in the audience feel the same way. A few years ago, I used to think that the human heart could only contain one emotional state at a time, and that my goal in life was to have as many moments of joy as possible and as few of pain. But one of the things I do in deep moments of pain, besides eating a disproportionate amount of bagels with cream cheese, is read Yehuda Amichai, my favorite Israeli poet. Amichai has a poem called "A Man Doesn't Have Time in His Life," which I first read years ago, but only truly understood only recently. This is how this poem starts, translated by Hannah Bloch and Stephen Mitchell. A man doesn't have time in his life to have time for everything. He doesn't have seasons enough to have a season for every purpose. Ecclesiastes was wrong about that. A man needs to love and to hate at the same moment, to laugh and to cry with the same eyes, with the same hands to throw stones and to gather them, to make love in war and war in love, and to hate and forgive and remember and forget, to arrange and confuse, to eat and to digest what history takes years and years to do. A man doesn't have time. When he loses, he seeks. When he finds, he forgets. When he forgets, he loves. When he loves, he begins to forget. I think Amichai, like the driver of the black car and the taxi driver, understood something fundamental about existence, not just Jewish or Israeli, but all existence. That life is full of pain, but also full of grace and beauty. These aren't two separate feelings. They exist together all the time. Even in a year filled with so much pain, there were countless moments of grace in my life. I got engaged. My 9th niece was born. I published a novel. I ice skated for the first time. I fell while ice skating for the first time. I stood in a crowd at a Nick Cave concert in Brooklyn, and my heart filled with a renewed love for music. I also stood for an hour in a New York City line just to experience what felt like the height of human creativity, the cronut, a combination of a croissant and a donut. I saw the cherry blossoms in Central Park. I watched with my own eyes an Israeli NBA player, Deni Avdia, score on LeBron James. If that's not the definition of a miracle, I don't know what is. I watched my friends and family demonstrate every week in Tel Aviv for the hostages. 59 Israelis they had never met, but who entered their hearts as deeply as other people possibly can. On a cold and rainy morning in New York, I stood in front of the United Nations with Israelis and American Jews to express support for the freed hostage, Eli Sharabi, who said just last week, "I went through horrors in my captivity, but I chose life." And this small, simple statement of Eli's perhaps contains the entire story, choosing life, a life with pain, with suffering, with sadness, but also with beauty, with kindness, and with good people who choose to fight again and again for a better future. People who can argue fiercely with each other over a traffic jam or politics one moment, and in the next drop everything to help someone they don't even know. This evening marks the impossible transition between the pain of Memorial Day, Yom HaZikaron, and the joy of Independence Day, Yom Ha'atzmaut. I always thought it was strange to make such an emotional transition so fast, but maybe I had to make it all the way to Israel for a shiva to see two drivers who found themselves in a moment of pain and grace, to understand that there is no need to make such a transition. Maybe I had to go all the way to Israel to understand that sometimes the only thing I can really do is to hold my emotions side by side, to embrace the pain of the last year and still see the endless beauty and joy that exists in this world. I used to think hope was a naive emotion, something that should exist regardless of all the terrible things happening in the world. But this visit to Israel and this entire past year taught me otherwise. Sometimes hope is the most clear-eyed, grounded choice a person can make in the face of uncertainty and chaos. To choose life in spite of everything. because those two drivers taught me that as long as people can, in a single moment, turn from rage to compassion, even after a terrible year filled with anger and pain, I still choose to hope. And if you came here tonight to an event that chooses to hold on to hope in spite of everything, then maybe, in your own way, you've chosen it too.
My name is Alana Zajcik. I am an Israeli American. I am a woman. I am a Jew, and most of all, I am a person who loves my family, a family that has been living in the unbearable space between hope and horror for 19 months. I am here to share with you some of the pieces of my shattered heart, and my hope is that you will carry them with you when you leave this room. When I was asked to speak to you today to share a story about hope on Yom Ha'atzmaut, a day meant for celebrating our freedom, I almost said no. I still have family being held hostage in Gaza. But then I remembered I'm a Jew. Hope is who we are. It's what we do, as if it's in our DNA. We know best that hope is not found. It's not a thing that you merely stumble upon. It's the choice we make when the cruel and cynical world tells us that there is none. So today, I will share my story, both its hope and its horror. On October 7th, I awoke here in New York to the news of Hamas's brutal attack on the Gaza envelope. My cousin Sharon Cunio was building a life on Kibbutz Nir Oz with her husband David and their 3-year-old girls, twins, Emma and Yuli. After a few years, we were used to the rockets and the red alert. It had become normal, if you can call it that. I quickly opened the group chat we have with all of our cousins, where Sharon was always the first to say, "We're okay," but there was only silence from her and her siblings. At that moment, I decided they would be okay. They had to be okay. There was no other option. I chose hope. As the hours stretched on, I learned that Sharon's sister, my cousin Danielle, and her 5.5-year-old daughter Emilia had been visiting them at the kibbutz that weekend. The world around me spun into a blur as I focused on the barrage of images and videos all over the news and social media, images of a massacre that Hamas themselves proudly live-streamed for the world to see. Like you, I saw Shani Luke's twisted, naked body on the back of a truck. Naama Levi, bloodied and bound, being dragged away. Noah Argamani, her face stretched in horror, reaching out for help that we could not give her. I thought of the women in my family who I could not reach either, my beloved cousins and their babies, and still I chose hope. I sat with my brother, glued to the news, willing Sharon and Danielle's names to light up our phones. I made up stories to push away the worst ones that my mind could conjure. Maybe there was no service in the safe room. Maybe they didn't have time to grab their phones. Maybe. Perhaps it was denial, or perhaps it was divine, because still I chose hope. Then a call came from my mother. My stomach sank into the earth when I answered, and her voice was wailing through the phone. "They're missing, they're not there." My heart hardened and turned into stone. We learned their house had been burned and destroyed. There was nothing left. But they were nowhere to be found. No bodies, but also no blood spilled. In that moment, no blood became my hope, so I chose it. As footage continued to emerge of the abductions and the brutality, I searched for their familiar faces. A video from Nir Oz was circulating, and I spotted David crouched in the back of a packed tractor, clutching one of their baby girls. Hamas terrorists surrounding them, guns raised, shouting, "Allahu Akbar." And then I saw Sharon. Not her face, but from the back, I knew it was my little cousin. She had just been here for my brother's wedding a month before. I closed my eyes and I saw the back of her head sitting in my kitchen as we laughed while I did her hair for his wedding. When I opened my eyes, I saw the same hair on that tractor being swept away from me. And I had no choice. I had to choose hope. So I started to scream. I would not be silent. I promised I would scream to the ends of the earth for them. By October 11th, I made my first news appearance. I told them 6 members of my family were missing, taken by Hamas. Over and over, I repeated Sharon's last voice note to her parents. We're not going to make it out of this. We love you. On the morning of October 13th, I was preparing to speak at the United Nations when I received news from Israel. All 6 of them were confirmed to be alive and were being held hostage in Gaza. I wept with relief, and simultaneously, my hardened heart shattered into a million pieces. I opened the notes app on my phone, and I added this very new reality to my speech as I declared, Yesh tikva, there is hope. I held on to it as if it was their very hands that I was grasping. I let go of the rest of my life. I tuned out the discourse to hold tightly, and I shared our story every single day. On social media, at the UN, on endless news broadcasts, in the New York Times, before politicians and community leaders, in front of hundreds of thousands in Washington, D.C. Every single day, I demanded that our leaders act as if my family was theirs. I advocated for the return of the hostages to be the number one, the only priority. I asked the world to help me bring them home. And then a miracle happened. In late November, a temporary ceasefire deal was struck. Daniel, Emilia, Sharon, Emma, Yuli, after 2 months of torture, they came home. But our story does not end there. David remains. Ariel, his brother, remains. For 572 days, 59 souls have been abandoned by their government, who every day asks them to survive. With no light, no air, no food, no water, with nothing but hope. We are their hope now, so we continue to create it anew every single day. Sharon, now a survivor, unable to heal, fields impossible questions from her young daughters, who are also survivors. Why is Abba still in Gaza with the bad men? Why won't he come home? Does he not love us anymore? She makes up stories for them that she weaves with threads of truth. She tells them of the very long and winding line that he is waiting on. She tells them how they are his light at the end of a tunnel, and he is making his way back as fast as he can. She tells them to keep talking about him and praying for him. She creates hope for them, for herself, for David, for everyone. And so must we. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Alana is always a hard act to follow. I'm an Israeli-American filmmaker, and I've been a New Yorker for the past 11 years. Recently, I directed Torn, a documentary about the Israel-Palestine paper war on the streets of New York City. When they asked me to speak about hope tonight, my first instinct was to walk on stage, say, "I've got nothing," and walk off. Talking in public always presents a challenge, but talking about hope in 2025, that's a dare. Hope is, or was, ever present in Israel. We all know Hatikva, the hope, is Israel's national anthem. And Tikva used to be a fairly common name for Israeli girls, but not anymore. According to Israel's Central Bureau of Statistics, almost no girls have been named Tikva since October 7. So is hope disappearing? Tonight, I want to share where I used to find hope and where I find it now. The last time I felt a real, pure sense of hope was during the mass protests in Israel against government corruption and the judicial overhaul meant to gut the very checks and balances that the Israeli democracy depends on. It felt like the silent majority had finally woken up. A sea of blue and white flags, the Star of David waving not in fear, but in defiance. In recent years, the Israeli flag had been appropriated by the political right, but during these protests, something shifted. Young people reclaimed the flag, and with it, the future of the country. Every time I visited Israel, I went to the Saturday night protests, waving the flag and singing En li eretz acheret. I won't give up on my country. I'll remind her and I'll sing in her ears until she opens her eyes. I had planned to be there again for week 40 of the protests, a symbolic week, but that weekend never came because it was October 7. A tsunami of horror, disbelief, disappearance. How can there be hope for a woman hiding in the bushes, for families fleeing the Gaza envelope, for soldiers left alone on the battlefield? And yet, there was hope because people acted. From Israelis who ran into the fire to rescue strangers, to those who opened their homes to fleeing families, to Jews around the world who mobilized to help their brothers and sisters in need. I was in Israel that week volunteering, and one thing that moved me deeply was a campaign not launched by the Israeli government, but by 3 Israeli artists, Dede Band-Aid, Nitzan Mintz, and Tal Huber. They didn't wait. They printed posters of the 251 hostages, Jews, Christians, Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, people from over 40 countries, and they put them up all over Manhattan and asked their friends and followers around the world to do the same. Putting up the posters became a lifeline, a first point of contact, a record of faces and of hope. It became one of the largest guerrilla campaigns in history. By putting up these posters of strangers they'd never met, people were hoping the world would unite in the face of an international hostage crisis, hoping that the hostages would be brought home, hoping that the smiles in those photos weren't the last, that these faces taped to lampposts would one day return to their families alive. It was a global gesture of solidarity, but that same symbol of hope ignited something else entirely, a street war waged with glue, tape, and paper thousands of miles from the battlefield. In Torn, I set out to capture the emotional zeitgeist of winter 2023 on the streets of New York. Let's watch the trailer for the movie.
On October 7th, we were in New York for an art residency.
But after we heard the news that over 1,200 people were murdered and more than 240 were kidnapped, we had to do something. We never thought it would spark another war. Thousands of miles away from the actual fighting in Gaza.
Fuck Israel, fuck you.
Pull.
Fuck you, propaganda.
3,000 Palestinians have lost their lives.
I haven't seen a single poster about my people.
It is perpetuating a completely false narrative.
Where are the Palestinians?
A genocide against Palestinians is just not genocide?
Seeing these faces is the ultimate challenge to the oppressed, oppressor binary view.
You're ripping down posters of kidnapped Jewish babies in your little Yasser Arafat scarves.
It's a trap, and you're willingly walking into the trap.
While working on the film, I never imagined, even in my worst nightmares, that 59 hostages would still be held in Gaza, or that the war would still be raging. What I wanted to document was how the social fabric of this city came apart. The posters were removed violently, aggressively, not what Deda, Nitzan, and Tal had hoped for. They were torn down over and over again, and yet people kept putting them back up. You know the saying, the darkest place is right under the lamppost? Well, in the winter of 2023, the darkest place was the lamppost. That's where the faces were defaced and slashed. That's where New York City, my city, was torn apart. That's where hope was torn too. When I began to make the film, the question I kept asking myself was, is empathy a limited resource? I browsed through hundreds of videos of people tearing down the posters. They all had something to say during the act. So many reasons and excuses. Some were silly, some hateful, some absurd, some anti-Semitic, and some, frankly, even made a kind of sense. But the act itself of ripping down a hostage poster is not just ugly. It's anti-freedom, anti-speech, anti-human. So where is hope when you need it most? Sometimes it's in a newborn's eyes, and sometimes it's in a 50-year-old construction worker named Polly who wears flannel and talks like he's from Queens. Polly saw someone tearing down a poster, and he confronted him. Polly's not Jewish, he's not an activist, he wasn't looking for attention, he just knew it was wrong and he acted. He wasn't the hero we expected, but he was the one we needed. When so many were silent, Polly gave us hope. Hope that decency still exists, hope that strangers still care. In Torn, I interviewed 10 incredible Jewish New Yorkers who stood up. From Alana to Chen. Alana, who as you just heard, has fought like a lioness and continues to fight to bring them home, is also daring to build bridges between Jews and Muslims, Israelis and Palestinians, even in the darkest of times. To Chen Levy, a jewelry designer and store owner in Midtown who kept putting up posters on her private window display despite violent backlash. Every day she'd put them up, and every day they'd get torn down. To this day, Chen is committed to putting up the posters till the hostages are home. When I made Torn, it was clear that the story couldn't just be one-sided. So I reached out to the people tearing the posters down. Many had been doxxed, fired, shamed. I wanted to understand. I DM'd those strangers, called, emailed, even commented on their GoFundMe pages. Most ignored me. Some told me they'd said everything that needed to be said. It was extremely frustrating. Here we are, thousands of miles from the war, and still, New Yorkers, most of them with no skin in the game, still didn't want to talk about it. So I found another way to tell that part of the story. And I did give the poster rippers a voice, but for that, you'll have to watch the film. I do want to leave you with one story that didn't make the film, one that I only heard of last week. A man named Korush Mystery didn't just tear down posters, he came prepared. He brought printed pro-Palestinian posters and methodically covered the faces of hostages. When someone filmed him and confronted him, he responded, "Go back to your country." The irony, Korush is an immigrant too. After the video went viral, he, like many others, lost his job. He was canceled. But the story doesn't end there. After months of soul searching, Korush decided to make amends. Only he didn't know how. No Jewish friends wanted to speak with him. No community would welcome him in. But he didn't give up hope. Eventually, he found Rabbi Sarah Rains of Temple Emmanuel, and instead of shutting the door, she opened it. They met, they spoke, they argued, and they listened. Over months, Korush practiced tshuva, repentance, return, repair. No, he didn't become a born-again Zionist. But he read dozens of books about the conflict and the history of the region, watched documentaries, volunteered with elderly Jewish New Yorkers. And yes, he even put up a few hostage posters himself. That gave me hope. Hope in Kurush, who wanted to repair. Hope in Rabbi Sarah, who made space for repair. Like Dede, like Nitzan, like Polly, we are the people we've been waiting for. Over the past year, I've screened Torn dozens of times across the US, in film festivals from Miami to Seattle. But the moment that gave me the most hope weren't at film festivals. They were in university classrooms, in JCCs, in synagogues, meeting people who still show up, who still put up posters, who still walk with a kippah or a chai necklace, who still speak up when they see injustice. And there's another layer of hope as well, a Jewish renaissance, not just religious, but cultural, a generation of creators, educators, thinkers, and leaders, redefining what Judaism and Zionism means to them. Not inherited, reimagined, renewed. What we're witnessing right here tonight. Hope isn't just out there. Hope is something that we build. There's a phrase in Hebrew that we use a lot in Israel, Yeush ze lo tochnit avoda. Despair is not a work plan. Hope doesn't come from press conferences of politicians. It's built from the ground up, by artists, by construction workers, rabbis, and the people sitting across from them. By anyone who refuses to give up when giving up would be easier. Yes, the world feels torn, but it's not broken beyond repair. What gives me hope most urgently is the people fighting day and night for the hostage deal. We must bring all of our brothers and sisters home. Over 70% of Israelis support their return and want this war to end. That matters. And what also gives me hope is the peace activists, the ones reminding us that peace isn't a fantasy, it's a process. We don't make peace with our enemies. Sorry, we don't make peace with our friends. We make peace with our enemies. If Israel has peace with Egypt and with Jordan, then peace with Palestinians is also possible. It may not happen tomorrow, but we owe it to the next generation to keep trying. Because that too is hope. Hope isn't passive. Hope takes effort. Hope is a choice. Let's choose it. We are the people we've been waiting for. Happy birthday, Israel. You are far from perfect. You have so much to work on, but I still love you. Thank you.
Where can the Jewish people truly find safety? This was the question that plagued Theodor Herzl, the founder of modern Zionism, in 1896. Herzl foresaw the end of European Jewry and the renewal of Jewish life in a modern state decades before either became a reality. In many ways, he is a contemporary prophet, a modern-day Moses leading the Jewish people to the Promised Land.
This Herzl of lore is part of what drove us to write an opera telling his story, but the story beyond the myth is even more interesting.
Theodor is a complex, ambivalent character, steeped in high Austro-Germanic culture, and yet fighting for Jewish autonomy. Sophisticated and cosmopolitan, traveling around the world as a journalist, yet deeply concerned with the particular issues of the Jewish people.
As we began to delve into these complexities, doing research to write our show, the largely private story of Julie Herzl, Theodor's wife, started to become more and more important to us.
We find in Julie's story a counter-narrative also worthy of exploration. Like many others at the time, Julie believes Jews are full members of European society, despite the Dreyfus Affair, pogroms, and Vienna's anti-Semitic mayor, Karl Lueger. She trusts that there is a future for the Jews in Europe.
Our opera interweaves these two strands, the larger-than-life mythological story of the prophetic leader Theodor Herzl and the intimate, dramatic story of Julie Herzl, who doesn't believe leaving Europe is the solution, but who is forced to sacrifice everything for her husband's dreams. Their conflict invites our uncertainty. Where is home? When should we stay and fight for the homes and the communities we have built? And when is it time to go somewhere else?
These questions and more remain very alive for us as Jews living in New York City today. How much should our Jewishness define us? What is the best way to combat anti-Semitism? Where is the future of the Jewish people?
In the spring of 1903, the Jewish community around the world was shocked and stunned by a massacre. The Kishinev pogrom on Easter Sunday of that year was, at that time, one of the most horrific displays of anti-Semitic violence in modern Jewish memory. It is no exaggeration to say that Kishinev, which involved the murder of approximately 50 Jews by a brutal mob, thoroughly documented in photographs and reporting, was a flashpoint that forever changed the course of Jewish history and transformed Jewish identity. Kishinev exposed the realities of anti-Semitism in Europe and ignited a fire in the hearts and minds of Jewish thinkers and writers everywhere to respond.
That spring, Theodor Herzl, leader of the Zionist movement at the time, reeling from the shock of Kishinev, aware of his own failing health and the time was running out, found himself in an impossible position. Just a few days after the pogrom, the British government offered Herzl and the Zionist movement an area of land in East Africa for Jewish settlement. For a Jewish leader like Herzl, fearful that the Jews of Eastern Europe and Russia were now under constant threat of death, Uganda was a possible temporary safe haven, an immediate solution to a 2,000-year-old problem of diaspora and political powerlessness. But was it the right one? Herzl knew that even considering the British offer would be controversial within his political movement to many of his followers, especially to his most fervent followers from Eastern Europe and Russia. It meant compromising too much on the hope of building a Jewish homeland in the historic land of Israel. But to what extent could he have imagined that considering this offer would tear his movement apart and risk its irrevocable fracture?
In our opera, State of the Jews, we dramatize this climactic moment in Jewish history. It is Sunday morning, August 23rd, 1903. The delegates of the Zionist movement have gathered once again in Basel, Switzerland, for the opening of the Sixth Zionist Congress. Word about the offer from the British government to establish a Jewish state in Uganda has spread, creating a tense restlessness throughout the room. Herzl rises to the podium to deliver his opening address. The room becomes silent.
Can Herzl, through the power of his speech, through his leadership, convince his Jewish community to choose unity over division and a painful, imperfect compromise over a long dreamed-for ideal? Can his words, his tenacity, his fervent hope for the future echo through the pages of history and offer any wisdom for the sake of our much hoped-for future of justice and peace?
Silence is chance to form a new society in East Africa, Uganda, Uganda. But do not worry, we won't forget Jerusalem. Im Eshkachech Yerushalayim, tishkach yemini. Im Eshkachech Yerushalayim, tishkach yemini.
Talk about a hard act to follow. That's a tough one. Like I think everyone else who's spoken here or performed here tonight, I struggled with the assignment. How would I talk about hope without saying things I didn't believe in? I thought about it for several days, and finally I had an idea. I wake up every morning thinking, it's going to take a miracle to get through this. I think you know what I mean by this. And what you think about this is up to you. What I want to talk about is the miracle. My question is, why do I call upon something I know isn't going to happen? What is that about? Nowadays, the word miracle is more of a figure of speech than a way of referring to a real thing. The figure of speech is called irony because miracle expresses a contradiction. When I say it's going to take a miracle, I'm saying I feel hopeless. But at the same time, because meaning comes in layers, I'm also saying that in some childlike part of me, in my fairy tale self, I believe that an act of God will keep the worst from happening because it just has to. That's called hoping against hope. It's remarkably hard to quash unreasonable optimism. What kind of miracle do I not believe in? Most of us, I think, and me, imagine a spectacular break in the natural order conducted by a supernatural being who has our well-being in mind. God sends plagues to wreak havoc on our enemies, or he drops food from the sky. That's called a public miracle in the world of miracle studies, which exists. And besides rescuing us at the last possible minute, it is meant to do two things. First, reveal that there's justice in the world, and second, arouse awe for the Almighty. The reason we've grown bitter about miracles, and in some cases about God, is that he doesn't perform them anymore. Maybe that's because he never existed. Or maybe it's because we can't see them anymore. If science can't explain it, it must not have happened. But our sages like to talk about a different kind of miracle, and that's the hidden miracle. The hidden miracle is a turn of events brought about by natural causes that nonetheless further God's ends. Hidden miracles they suit us, they work for us, because they don't trouble our understanding of causality, of how the world works. They don't ask us to take anything on faith. An example that's relevant tonight is the creation of the State of Israel. We can draw up timeline after timeline and say this caused that, and that led to this momentous event. But from another perspective, it all looks like God's plan. The master of the hidden miracle was Nachmanides, the great 13th century rabbi and Kabbalist, also known as Ramban. He said, actually, we do need faith to perceive miracles disguised as explainable occurrences. Now, Rambam was a mystic, so the next thing you'd expect him to say is that all of nature is held up by hidden miracles. But Rambam actually said the opposite. He said hidden miracles are incredibly rare. God only works his wonders for the righteous. So, who are the righteous? People who can hold fast to God at all times and never think about anything else. Of course, no one is actually that focused. Ramban admits that. In all of history, only 4 people were righteous enough to deserve hidden miracles. Those were Adam before the fall, Moshe Rabbeinu, Elijah the prophet, and Enoch, who was so devout and apparently so boring that the Torah gives him only a single line, which is, Enoch walked with God. Now, we don't walk with God, so what good are hidden miracles to us? We could put the idea to therapeutic use by turning it into uplifting advice. Since 4 men, after all, did manage to impress God enough to benefit from his miracles, that means we shouldn't give up. We should persist. We should cling to hope when all seems hopeless. But Ramban would never mean anything that simplistic. So he made an exception to his own rule. He said that God also works his hidden miracles on a certain piece of land. That land would be Israel, where everyone is righteous, and God looks out for them at all times. Now, I imagine there might be some people in this room who would object to the notion that living in that particular region would entitle one to heavenly favors. But Ramban goes on to explain that when he says Israel, he really means our entire nation, every single member. In other words, it's the people of Israel whom God sustains by way of hidden miracles. On the face of it, this is also absurd. We all know that Jewish people can behave unbelievably badly, even in Israel. So why should they get a pass? Besides, Jewish history does not support the idea that God protects the Jewish people. But I think the idea that Jewish peoplehood is miraculous has, if you'll forgive me the phrase, sociological realism, by which I mean it describes reality, a social reality. There is a certain indisputable fact, which is also a miracle. That is that the Jews have survived, which is really one of the great mysteries of history. I've seen this miracle at work in my own neighborhood since October 7th. I live next door, and I'm married to someone who teaches on a famously radical campus. So I have an up-close and personal view of how Jews react to their Jewish identity being challenged as never before in their lifetime or mine. On this campus, there are good Jews and bad Jews. The good Jews repudiate Israel, as every good person must. And the bad Jews are bad because they refuse to speak out against a rogue apartheid state. I've seen Jews, not just the young ones, but older ones as well, decide to be a good Jew. And I've seen Jews reject this upside-down version of reality. What's the difference? The answer now seems pretty clear. It's not day school or not just day school, though that doesn't hurt. It's a solidly, and please forgive this phrase as well, tribal sense of oneself as a member of a people. A people that sometimes does right and sometimes does wrong, but is still your people. Peoplehood is a burden. It's a drag. Because we tend to want to dissociate ourselves from people who shame us. And it may be oppressive to feel responsible for trying to make them behave better. But peoplehood is also a powerful magic. It gives us compassion for those close to us, which surprisingly is one of the hard things to maintain. And it gives us the ability to take our place in the generations, to have an appropriately majestic understanding of time and history. So, what should we think about the non-miracle miracles that we say it's going to take, despite our own better judgment? I think the very word comes to remind us that some sort of deliverance may be at hand, but too close at hand to see. Miracles are rare, as Rambam taught us, and hope is not blind optimism. It's not having faith that we'll be all right when we may not be, at least not right now. But we don't get to despair either, because it may turn out that we are our own miracles. Thanks.
אני מאמין, I believe. שאול צ'רניחובסקי, Odessa, 1892. You may laugh at my faith and friendship. I will find a heart. In this I have faith. A heart that shares in all my hopes. A heart that feels both joy and pain. Excerpts from text messages translated from Hebrew. August 15th, 2024. Hymn. I wanted to say shalom, though it feels like we're so far from this word's meaning. Every day is harder than the one before. I'm not sure how we will come back from this insanity, but I'm holding on to hope. I wish you a day filled with beauty. October 1st, 2024. Me. We must keep searching for more people who would fight for peace. Him. Achoti, Shana Tova. My sister, Happy New Year. When our intentions are honest, God helps people meet. I believe this because you and I have found our friendship. February 21st, 2025. Him. Shalom, sister. The heart is yearning for mercy. Me. Salam, my brother. Today I have little strength. I need to give my heart a rest. I needed to hear your voice because your words always comfort me. Amen. Yours as well. One of the things that gives me hope is that image that we have, you and I, older, drinking our coffee in Jerusalem. There is light after the darkness. February 28, 2025, me, Ramadan Karim, him, Toda, my sister, Shabbat Shalom. March 31st, 2025. Hymn. Despite it all, I believe there is hope, and there always will be. Peace and coexistence starts with us. For me, hope is in this friendship, and in all who dream of a future where every person is treated with dignity and who fights for a society that chooses peace, justice, and independence for Israelis and Palestinians, Jews and Arabs. שחקי על חלומות, זו אני החולם שחקי כי באדמה מן, כי עודני מאמין בך, שחקי כי באדמה כי עודני מאמין בך, כי עוד נפשי דרור שואפת, לא מכרתי על עגל פז, כי עוד אמין גם באדם, גם ברוחו רוח אז, כי עוד אמין גם באדם, גם ברוחו רוח אז. שחקי כי גם ברעות האמין, האמין כי אמצא לב תקוותיי, גם תקוותיו, יחוש אושר, יבין כאב, לב תקוותיי, גם תקוותיו, יחוש אושר, יבין כאב. אמינה גם בעתיד, אף אם ירחק זה היום, אך בו יבוא יישאו שלום, אז וברכה לאום מלאום, אך בו יבוא יישאו שלום, אז וברכה לאום מלאום.
In the first week of the war, President Biden held a Zoom call with American families of missing and kidnapped. One participant was Sigal Steiner Mansouri, whose daughters Roya and Norel had been at the Nova Festival. At the time, Roya had been buried, but Norel was still missing. Rachel Goldberg-Polin, who I assume you all know, described that Zoom call on our podcast, Israel Story.
He wanted to hear everyone's story. And she stood up and she went to like the door of the room she was in And she comes back in and she says, I have to interrupt. And the president said, yeah, go ahead. And she said, I just got the door knock that my other daughter is dead. And he wiped his eyes and he said, I have lost 2 children. And I know right now you're in unimaginable agony, but one day you are going to need to be strong for the rest of your family. You can scream to me as much as you want. And if you need me to, I'll call you tomorrow and you can keep screaming at me. But you're going to need to allow yourself to be there for your family. It was just a real human moment. It was a whisper of somebody getting the pain.
A whisper of somebody getting the pain. That's my goal for the next 10 minutes or so, for all of us to have a whisper of understanding of each other's vulnerability and humanity, and maybe that can help us chart a path towards hope. We started Israel Story podcast about 13 years ago, and our goal was to tell extraordinary stories of ordinary Israelis, trying to change the discourse of shouting to listening through carefully crafted audio documentaries. But after October 7th, like for everyone else, everything changed for us. We had to ask ourselves, what is our role as storytellers in a moment of national trauma? And that's how Wartime Diaries started. Our first interview was with Sasha Ariav, who came into the studio literally just days after her sister was kidnapped to Gaza.
Hi, Sasha.
Hi.
Can
Hi,
you
guys.
tell me a little bit about yourself?
Yes. So my name is Sasha. I'm 24 years old, born and raised in Israel. And I have a little sister. She's all I have. This is me. This is how I want to present myself.
If you listen closely, you can hear that Mishi Harman, the co-founder and host of Israel Story that you just heard here as the interviewer, is almost whispering. And that's because these weren't interviews in the usual sense. People were grieving out loud, processing in real time. The ground was literally still smoldering. Our producer Mitch, for example, went down to a dairy farm in Kibbutz Kisufim where every single worker had been killed.
Kalashnikov magazines. Oh, man.
He found a notebook belonging to one of those murdered there, and we had to figure out who to return it to. Our producer Adina traveled to Be'eri to speak to her own cousin.
An oven just like tossed on the side of the yard. Pillow, somebody's pillow. There's 2 soccer balls. You can still tell that it was paradise.
So this was all deeply personal. But even then, life kept pushing forward. For example, for Catherine, who called her mother-in-law to tell her that the wedding was off. Absolutely not, she responded.
We don't postpone joyous occasions. Lo dochim smachot, as they say.
So a group of friends got together, they decorated a park above a public bomb shelter, and they arranged an impromptu chuppah.
It felt like I was like protected, like I was being shielded from everything around us.
We talked to Isa from Jerusalem.
I'm the first Santa Claus in the Middle East and from the Holy Land.
Isa was preparing for an especially empty holiday in the Old City, but he was not letting that ruin his Christmas spirit.
My message this year, it's a special message. Hope, love, and peace from the heart of the word Jerusalem in the Holy Land.
We spoke with chefs, programmers, rabbis, social workers, who all put everything aside and offered up their skills. Even poets put their pens to use.
You know, the poet Leah Goldberg, she wrote that during war, poets, they must, don't just have the permission, but they must write about love, about nature.
That was poet Agi Mishol, who volunteered to write eulogies to people that she never met. Through these conversations, one thing became clear. The opposite of hope, of despair, isn't hope, it's action. Stagnation and immobility lead to sinking, but when you keep moving, eventually you catch a glimpse of the horizon. For us, at least, keeping busy, crisscrossing the country, and talking to dozens of people was incredibly therapeutic. It gave us a sense of purpose, agency, and pride. But on the other hand, many of these interviews were the hardest we've ever had to conduct. Sitting with Rachel and John on Hirsch's bed, or hearing Omer describe his partner Sagi, who was killed just 2 weeks before they were set to marry.
Sagi was so handsome. He was so smart. He was the whole package.
Or Amit, who was eerily calm and collected when she told us about her husband, the father of her toddler, who went to reserve duty and never came back.
Most of the time, I don't believe in it. It's like he went to buy at the store or something. So yeah, he went dead somewhere, and then he's gonna come back from the dead.
But maybe the hardest was hearing people say things that you deeply object to. This, for example, is Datia, who dreams of returning to her home in Kfar Yam, on the shores of Gaza.
First of all, clean Gaza from terror. Second of all, take all the people out, the Arabs, out of Gaza region and resettle them.
We didn't air these views because we endorsed them, but because they reflected a real lived emotions in Israeli society. And what does it even mean to listen, to really listen to someone you disagree with? For me, that is part of what I mean by action as the antidote to hopelessness. Because remaining confined in your own echo chamber, that's also a form of stagnation. Another important part of that picture is, of course, including Arab voices, which proved incredibly challenging.
It's very, very, very dangerous as Palestinians in this country to talk about October 7th. Either you accept the Israeli story and they will accept you, you don't talk, or the third option is that you talk and you pay the price for it.
Anwar, for example, he's married to a Jewish Israeli, and he described the challenges of raising their mixed-race daughter together. At her school, the students were asked to draw a visual representation of their feelings. And Anwar's daughter, well, she drew two figures.
One with hands on the ears, covering the ears, and the other person is with the hands covering the mouth. And when the teacher asked her if she can tell who is this, so she said, the one who is covering the ears is my Jewish friends, and those who are covering the mouth are my Palestinian friends.
Faiz from Rat spoke to us about the impossible position of being a Bedouin Israeli.
We're between a rock and a hard place. 70% of our tribe live in Gaza. Some of them were killed in the Israeli bombings, even though they have no affiliation with Hamas. They're just innocent people sitting in their homes, and then a missile comes and destroys them.
I agreed to stand here not because I'm full of hope, but despite not feeling full of hope. Because, and I know I'm repeating myself, but I do think it bears repeating, the antidote to despair is action. Making sandwiches, writing eulogies, helping a friend arrange a last-minute marriage, dusting off that Santa Claus costume and forcing on a smile. And nobody embodies that action more than the mothers of the kidnapped. So I want to leave the final word to one of them, Idit Oel, the mother of Alon, who is still, as I speak, 572 days in the dungeons of Hamas. Just to set this last clip up, I spoke with Idit for almost 2 hours, heart-wrenching hours. And at the end of those hours, I asked her my usual ending question. I'm going to leave you with what she had to say.
I always ask this at the end of the interview, but is there anything that I didn't ask that you wish that I did ask, or something else that you would like to add?
Yes, there's something very important.
Okay.
You know, I've been talking and sharing my story and Alon's story, and I want to ask whoever is listening to do something. Do something good, giving, something that's good for somebody else, but think about the hostages when they're doing it. even one hostage. Think about Alon, think about Hirsch, whatever. Do something that makes you feel like you are doing something meaningful and important. It's not enough just to listen. You have to do something. So do something nice.
Erev Tov. I will be reading 3 poems by Yehuda Amichai. Yehuda Amichai, who was born in 1924 and passed away in the year 2000, is widely regarded as one of the greatest Israeli poets. His poetry is known for its emotional honesty, quiet irony, and deep humanity. He wrote with a voice that was both intimate and universal, making the political personal and the personal timeless. His work has been translated into dozens of languages and continues to resonate across cultures and generations. Ein Yahav, translated by Hannah Bloch and Hannah Kronfeld. A night drive to Ein Yahav in the Arava desert. A drive in the rain. Yes, in the rain. There I met people who grow date palms. There I saw tamarsik trees and risk trees. There I saw hope barbed as barbed wire. And I said to myself, that's true. Hope needs to be like barbed wire to keep out despair. Hope must be a minefield. May I rest in peace, translated by Hannah Bloch and Hannah Kronfeld. May I rest in peace. I, who am still living, say, may I have peace in the rest of my life. I want peace right now, while I'm still alive. I don't want to wait, like the pious man who wished for one leg of the golden chair of paradise. I want a 4-legged chair right here, a wooden chair. I want the rest of my peace now. I have lived out my life in wars of every kind, battles without and within, close combat, face to face, the faces always my own, my lover face, my enemy face. Wars with the old weapons, sticks and stones, blunt axe, word, dull ripping knife, love and hate. And wars with newfangled weapons, machine gun, missiles, words, landmines exploding, love and hate. I don't want to fulfill my parents' prophecy that life is war. I want peace with all my body and all my soul. Rest me in peace. Forgetting Someone, translated by Hannah Bloch and Hannah Kronfeld. Forgetting someone is like forgetting to turn off the light in the backyard, so it stays lit all the next day. But then it is the light that makes you remember. Thank you.